Okay, folks, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you all for coming today. It's such a pleasure to have so many of you here in person. Hopefully, Amarachi and Lolita will be joining virtually as well soon. I wanted to start off by thanking the Oregon Department of Administrative Services. That's the institution that owns this building that we're in right now. And if you don't know, the bathrooms, if you need to use the restroom at some point, through the doors and then past the elevators and to your right, there's the bathrooms, and then there's also a water station where you can fill up a water bottle or a container. So if you don't have one, make sure you grab a packet. It's a supplementary materials handout packet right here. It has the agenda as the first sheet for today. I'm just going to go ahead and walk us through what we're doing today to kick us off. So big picture, the purpose of today is to prepare this body to engage in the large grants funding process in January and February. So today is going to be a lot of orienting and familiarizing you with the process, the content, and the data that you can expect to see in January and February, so that by the time we get to those meetings, we can spend less time orienting you and more time engaging with what the information means and what recommendations you want to make. So we have the meeting outcomes up on the slide right now. So for today, we're hoping that you will leave understanding your role in the upcoming large grants funding process, as well as the associated advocacy limitations associated with your role. We want to strengthen your ability to understand and make meaning of the data visualizations that you will be encountering, which in those visualizations will be summarizing applicant characteristics. We want to prepare you for discussing and recommending applicant characteristics that staff are going to use to shape 2 anonymous portfolios next year. And then at the end of the meeting, we're going to discuss and vote on suggested bylaw amendments. So to do this, if you wanted to look at the agenda that you have in front of you, we're just going to start with an overview of where we've been and where we're going, as well as a check-in, and that's something that Erica is going to lead us in a moment. And then we're going to move on to a presentation and discussion about the council's role in the large grants funding process. I'll be leading that. Lisa is going to introduce advocacy limitations of the large grants funding round. We're going to have a 10-minute break, one at 1:55 to 2:05. And then we're going to spend the meat of the meeting introducing and making meaning of data visualizations, summarizing applicant characteristics. So Meg's going to lead that, and I'll be supporting that as well. We'll have a break after that, and then we're going to close with a discussion and vote on bylaw amendments, and then end with next steps in evaluation. Does anyone have any questions about today's meeting outcomes or the agenda? Okay. I see that Lolita and Amarachi have joined. So good to have you both here as well. Oh, Amarachi, it looks like your audio is not working for you yet. Joel or John, if you would mind supporting her virtually. So before I kick it over to Erica, I just want to encourage everyone to go to the bathroom, get water, grab food, stand and stretch regardless of whether or not we're taking a break at that moment. There's a lot of dense material that we're going to be covering today, and I want to invite you to do what you need to stay as present as possible for the duration of the meeting. So Erica, I'm going to go ahead and pass it over to you.
Okay, great. So now we're going to get into talking about where we've been and where we're going. The slide that we're looking at now is illustrating the big picture phrases and timeline of the Levy and the community council work that you have been doing, some of which you've already accomplished and some of which is still coming. During our 2 years together, you made numerous process and product recommendations. We know this work can sometimes feel abstract and theoretical, so we wanted to walk you through the Community Council's recommendations and what they've met in practice. So the community engagement process recommendations that you made in 2023 framed how community engagement was conducted. We as staff translated the results of community engagement into funding priorities, and this past spring, you reviewed, revised, and recommended funding priorities for adoption into the final application by the allocation committee. Those funding priorities direct how approximately $23 million of levy money is spent annually for the next 3 years. Right now, as we speak, organizations are currently applying to implement those funding priorities in 2025 through 2030. The application questions and, ooh, got it? Oh. It should be down there. The application questions and scoring criteria that you framed and revised are being used as we speak. We're currently accepting applications, and we'll be using both the application and scoring criteria to understand and evaluate how the programs and services applicants are proposing and to get the score. And this past spring, you recommended that we use community volunteers to review our large grants applications. We project that to train 90 to 100 community members to review 100 to 120 grant applications. We're preparing the reviewer trainings now. Those are the highlights of our work that we've accomplished together so far. At this point, we are in one of the levy's busiest times, the large grants funding and decision-making process, which will run through May of next year. We'll spend the rest of this meeting orienting you to what you can expect during this time. Before we dig into the rest of the meeting, though, let's start with a pair share check-in. So if you can move to the next slide. So I'm going to ask you to pair up with someone next to you and just reflect on the community council's work together. What's something that you're proud of? And then you can have 2 minutes per person. And I think we have 2 people in the breakout room. Okay, so John's going to put the 2 of you in a breakout room so you can share together. And then we will come back. So you can go ahead. like you all had some really great discussions. Thank you. I'm going to turn it back to Katrina.
Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and go over what the council's role is going to be in the large grants funding process. So the funding process is currently underway, and during this process, the community council is going to be playing an advisory role. At 2 points in this process, you're going to be advising staff and the allocation committee on 2 core questions. What characteristics should staff use to craft 2 anonymous portfolios of applicants? And of the 2 anonymous portfolios created, which one do you recommend to the allocation committee for funding? So I'm going to explain this in more detail. So looking at this image, the large grants process started this past September and will run through next May. The bright blue top boxes are activities that applicants and community members are engaged in. The yellow middle boxes are points where you, our advisory body, or the allocation committee, our decision-making body, are engaged. And the dark blue bottom boxes describe staff deliverables. So big picture, applications opened on September 10th and are due November 4th. Mid-November, staff will train community members in their roles and responsibilities as large grants volunteer reviewers. Volunteers have 8 weeks to review the applications, and each application will be reviewed by 5 volunteers. All reviews are due by January 10th. At the same time, staff will compile and analyze applicant characteristics. So at this meeting that we are currently in, we are orienting you to the upcoming funding process. Come late January, staff is going to bring you our analysis of the applicant pool. And we're going to ask you to advise us on what applicant characteristics staff should use to craft 2 anonymous portfolios of applicants. During this conversation, we will not talk about individual applicants, nor will we share any applicant names or identifying information. Instead, we will be sharing de-identified, Levy or program-wide applicant characteristics and ask you to think through what qualities characterize applications you want to recommend for funding. We are anonymizing the data and keeping the discussion at the policy level to reduce perceived and existing conflicts of interest and biases between community council members and applicants. We will spend the majority of today's meeting introducing you to the type of information and data visualizations you can expect to see from us in January. Then from January's meeting, staff are going to take the community council's recommendations and craft 2 anonymous Levy-wide portfolios, which we will send to you in advance of meeting. You will then reconvene at the end of February, where we will ask you to recommend one of the 2 anonymous portfolios for funding to the allocation committee. At the beginning of March, the recommended portfolio will be made public and sent to applicants and the allocation committee. Applicants will have the opportunity to submit testimony in response to recommendations between mid-March and early April. The allocation committee will convene at the end of April to make funding decisions, and these decisions will be sent to the Portland City Council for final approval. Once approved, grants are going to start on January 1st. So I wanted to open it. Thank you. July 1st, not January 1st, July. So I'm just going to go ahead and pause there and invite any questions and reactions you have about this process. Go ahead, Kamala, and go ahead and, if you can use the mic, and go ahead and pull it towards you and push the speaker button.
Does that work? How about that? Okay. For that, when it goes to the city council, I guess it's 2-part. One, has that generally just been like kind of a procedural, has city council ever said, hey, we want to get into the weeds and talk about something, or?
No, because the way that the, sorry, this doesn't want to stay down. The way that the structure of their review is, they can either reject the entire thing or accept the entire thing. There is no line item veto, if you remember that from your American government class. You don't get to just say, I don't like that one, or I don't like this one. So there has not been much. There was once somebody felt unprepared to approve and they abstained from the vote. But that was the only time that happened.
Okay.
So.
And then I guess my second question being, we have a new form of government in place as of this next round of review, and just curious if you're anticipating any changes.
Excellent question. I anticipate changes just because that seems to be what is happening all around me all the time, but I don't really know what that will look like. I'm unclear whether we will go to a committee, which there's a committee structure now, and I don't know whether, or there will be, and I'm not sure if that will happen first or if this will go directly or not. So we will keep you advised as we learn more. They're kind of writing the rules as we speak.
Can I ask about the 2 anonymous portfolios created? You said that 1 of 2 will be selected. It sounds like then we won't, or, I mean, each portfolio will stick together. I guess I don't fully understand that.
Yeah, so I can attempt to explain it a little more. So big picture, we have probably around 100, maybe more than 100 applications coming in November 4th. Staff is going to analyze information about the applicants, and we're calling that applicant characteristics, and we're going to talk more about what those are soon. That's things like how much money they're requesting, what program area they're wanting to request money in, what types of services they're wanting to offer. So we're going to compile a bunch of information into as bite-sized of pieces as is manageable. And then come January, the conversation that we're wanting to have with you is, okay, here's all of this information about the applicants. What are the characteristics of the applicants that you want to support for funding? So we're kind of talking at a policy level and not getting into the weeds of the specifics of each application. And so from that, staff are going to take your recommendations about what sorts of characteristics you want to recommend for funding, and we're going to craft 2 portfolios, and then we're going to bring them back to you and share what the differences are between those 2 portfolios. And then we're going to invite you to recommend one of them. Part of what's going on is there's a much higher demand for funding than there is resources available. So we can't fund nearly all of the applications that come in, and so it's a process of trying to select of the applications we have, who do we want to fund. Amarachi or Lolita, I just want to ask if you have any questions.
I don't have any questions at this time.
My questions have been asked. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll go ahead and move on from here. If there are more questions that come up for you about the process as the meeting goes on, go ahead and raise them at that point. So Lisa, we're actually going to go ahead and turn it over to you.
Okay, thanks, Katrina. Doesn't want to stay down. Okay, I want to talk just a little bit about advocacy limitations. Okay, so that what that is, why we have them, and what that might mean for you as a community council member. So we said.
Lisa, can you bring the mic a little closer to your mouth?
Sit up straighter. These are very low chairs. Okay, there we go. That's better. So when we say advocacy limitations, what we're talking about is that the people who are applying for funding are not permitted to advocate to any of the council members or to the allocation committee members in any way that would be an attempt to influence the outcome of the funding round. So that rule is for this group and the allocation committee as well. So the time frame is from the beginning of the application period, which was September 10th, all the way through the allocation committee making decisions in April. So for that whole time, folks are not meant to be talking to people about their programs and organizations and how fantastic they are. The reason that we did this was we got strong feedback before the 2019 round that people felt there was unequal access to allocation committee members. And again, remember, there was no community council then. So it was allocation committee members that the feedback was about. And people didn't feel that everyone had the same access and that allocation committee members were being influenced by whomever was advocating to them. So we, in that funding round, stopped the process of or the ability to do any advocacy work with the people who are making the funding decisions or advising for the funding decisions. And as staff, we have done the same. So we have not taken any meetings with anybody who wants to tell us about programs of any kind since we published the application. So we're kind of trying to set the same standard for all the participants in the process. We let the applicants know about this. It's in all the written documentation that went out. It's in the stuff that you would take on the website. And so that rule is out there. But we wanted to go over it here today because you may still encounter situations where that happens, and just to give you some sense of how it might pop up or what might be the situations and how you might deal with them. You have to remember that many people, there's so much stuff to read in an application, people might just not, they might not have read it, they might not know about it, even though they are applying for funding. They may not know you're sitting on the community council, so you can't assume that anybody knows that necessarily, especially if it's just an acquaintance that you're talking to. And then we assume because you are active in this sphere of children and families that you're probably talking to colleagues and friends and who knows, other people, that it could possibly come up. So that's why we're mentioning it. So we're going to give you a few guidelines of things you could do or could say if you are put in a situation where somebody wants to talk to you about their program and their organization. And you may not know if they're an applicant. You might know that they're a grantee, but you may not know more than that and what you might do. If you want to hit to the other slide. So if you encounter that, if you're out in the community and you are talking to folks who work for grantee organizations, or you're talking to folks from organizations that serve children and families and might be applying, there's some things you can do if you think that you're being advocated to or potentially might be. One is just to identify yourself as a member of the council, because a person might not know, even if they're, especially if they're just an acquaintance. Maybe remind them that advocacy isn't allowed, and so you just don't have to, you have a way to cut off the conversation if you need to. And then you can let them know just kind of what we went over, what Katrina just went over, that you all are going to be working with a portfolio where the information is not about the individual applicants is not in the portfolio. So you won't be looking at particular individual programs in the same way. So that might relieve their own anxiety potentially about. I mean, we've put that information is out in the applications. We've said that publicly, but that doesn't mean that people internalize it. So. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so with all that talking, I will stop, and now you all can, we thought we'd do a little pair and share. Katrina, do they have, or pair and practice really, it's more like a role play. They've got that document, okay.
Yeah, so it's on the back of the agenda. If you just open that supplementary materials handout and flip the first page, it's page number 2. The advocacy scenario should be on page number 2.
Okay, do we want to let folks, should we take staff out of the bargain and let maybe have people move? I'd prefer you all to be able to, because I realize we're odd numbers on this side. Brian, you want to pop out of your seat and maybe have somebody from there go around? Oh, okay, perfect. I'll move. Never mind. Stay put and I will move. So this is a little role play. There's some scenarios on the back there, and some person could play the advocate, one person could play the council member, and just practice how you would Sorry. Can folks on screen hear me now too? Okay, good. Okay, and you have your hand. Okay, you know what? I'm going to go to Amarachi first since you had your hand up. If there's any additional questions or discussion, let's go ahead and have it now.
Sure. It was just wanting some clarification as we're doing the, as me and, as I was doing the, I was wondering, when it applies to there being a conflict of interest, that is during the funding period with, that applies to just anybody advocating for the program if the program is involving services for children and families, correct? Children, youth, and families, right?
That's the idea, because you won't know who's applied. So just
Yes.
as a safeguard.
Okay, thank you.
Go ahead.
All right. So my question is this. So a lot of these are just conversational pieces. And my question is, if you like, how do you approach it? Am I not allowed to talk to anybody, even though my work considers technically working with kids and young adults and stuff like that? Am I not allowed to have any conversations with them or questions or conversations about their programs during this time? Because that was one of the big, like, I guess, if you're in the field, how do you navigate that? And that was questionable.
I mean, I think if you feel it's going to come down to some level of judgment call. Do you feel like someone is advocating to you about something, about how great the thing they're involved with is? And, we're concerned about people that you think would be an applicant. I think most kids probably aren't going to fall into that category because they're not an employee of an organization or they're not on the board of an organization, probably. I mean, there may be some exceptions to that, but.
Oh, for sure. No, I mean, like, organizations that work with kids, I guess. Like for instance, I can't even talk about that. But if I was a part of an organization that works with kids already, and I'm partnering with other organizations that work with kids, is there a situation where I can still have conversations that are about partnerships between business A and business B? Or do I have to exclude myself and maybe have someone else have those conversations?
I mean, that's general enough that it's hard to say. So it's going to be some level of judgment call on your part where you feel like, does this person know I'm on the community council? Does this person, is there a chance they may be an applicant? So it's sort of, not going to know and that's why we wanted you to role play a little bit, because it could be a bit of a judgment call. So if you want to just put everything on the table and say, you know what, I'm sitting on the council. I don't know if you're applying or not, but I just want to let you know I can't really listen to any advocacy about your program. And that, the information isn't advocacy necessarily, right? I mean, it's not like you can shut your ears to all information about everything to do with children and families in the community, but that's kind of where you're making that kind of line. Meg, you look like you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I just really wanted to clarify that as I listened to Jacob's question, what I heard was a little bit about, like, if it's my day-to-day business to be in partnership with other providers of children and family services, there are conversations that have to get had that are just about providing your services. If there are conversations with the intention of influencing the outcome of this funding process, the first one is a green light, the second one is the red light, if that makes sense. So it really comes down to what's the intention of the conversation. Is the intention of the conversation about funding related to the levy and an application, or is the intention of the conversation just about, hey, are you going to show up at that site today and serve the kids like we talked about? That one's fine.
And the line is where the judgment comes in. Anything else? Okay, one last word. I just want to say I don't see any other hands so far. We will be asking folks at the January and February meetings at this table, at the council members, to declare any conflicts, any known conflicts that you have. So known conflicts are when you know that you work for an organization that is an applicant, or you know that you have a relative. My sister works at ERCO, and ERCO is a grantee, and likely they're an applicant. So there's, and the third situation is board member. If you are sitting on the board of another organization that you know is an applicant. So this is known conflicts. We understand that you may have a conflict you don't know about. But if you know about it, we would be asking you to declare it at January and February. So I just want to give folks a heads up on that, because you'll move into discussion about portfolios and such then. Okay. I think that's it.
Can you talk about what that process is like if you are you recusing yourself from serving, or what that would look like if, for example, like my organization wanted to apply? How would that pan out?
You just have to declare the conflict, and we'll give you some information about that when it comes time to do what you have to say and all that. You don't necessarily have to recuse yourself because, as you recall, you're not going to be talking about individual applicants. So you're not in the same kind of decision-making process that an allocation committee member might be in, where they might need to recuse themselves from a specific decision.
Exactly. I just would worry that if, like in my position, would be like the funding that our would apply for would directly serve programs that I run. So it feels a little more like it would be directly benefiting me in that way if we applied, because I'm doing programs for kids. Does that make sense?
Is there something that is there a question in there? I'm just curious. What?
If the process is any different because of how close that relationship is, if there was an application from the organization I work for the levy, I would know immediately that this is.
And you would need to declare it.
Okay, and that's it.
That's all. You just have to let everybody know.
I'm just taking a beat to make sure everyone has let their thoughts marinate and no one has any last questions that come to their mind. Okay. Well, we are running a little bit ahead of time. We were going to take a break now. Does anyone want a break right now, or are you all ready to just keep on chugging? Keep on chugging? Amarachi and Lolita, I saw a nod from you. Yep. Okay. We're just going to keep on. We're going to keep on going. So we're going to get into data. Get ready to put your thinking caps on. Nope. Keep your laptops away right now. We'll ask you to pull them out later. It's okay. We have backups.
All right, y'all. So a couple things I want to just say before we get started. As Katrina introduced the idea of the anonymous portfolios, Stephen asked a question that sort of got to the how. Like, how are we going to do this? So we are hopeful that what you're about to do will help answer that question of how. As you look at characteristics about applicants and think about them at a policy level, I think you will begin to understand how two different portfolios of grant applications could come together in a way where you never see the name of the applicant. So while you may have to declare a conflict early on, you will not be in a position of knowing Portfolio A contains an application that I know about or Portfolio B does. So that's sort of the anonymity, and we're going to get into the characteristics that will help you think about how should staff form portfolios, and then ultimately, how will we decide between them? So that's the ride we're about to go on. Okay, so we are hoping that you will leave today and this sort of time that we're about to do with the skills to understand and make meaning of some data visualizations that will summarize applicant characteristics, and that when you come back in January, you will be prepared to discuss and recommend how staff can use those characteristics to shape two different anonymous grant portfolios. So I am going to walk you through 4 sets of data visualizations about applicants, and we will use similar visuals in January when we meet again. The visuals you see today are presenting applicant characteristics from our 2019-20 large grants funding round as an example. They include all applicants for levy funds at that time, so both funded and unfunded applications. Nothing we are going to talk about today is focused on our current grantees only. It is all applicants. The types of data that we will look at to review the characteristics of the applicant pool are amounts of funds requested versus available, numbers of applications by the levy's 6 program areas. Just a quick reminder, that's early childhood, child abuse prevention intervention, foster care, hunger relief, after school, and mentoring. The number of applications by organization type, so whether the organization applicant was a grantee or was a organization new to PCL funding, the number of applications that proposed to serve certain populations, and the number of applications that proposed to address levy funding priorities, and then scores on applications by program area and funding requested. The point of this exercise is to practice making meaning from these data about application characteristics. And again, we're looking at 2019 data to create these examples. And we will use these types of visual tools again in the months ahead. And we will be updating them when you see them next time with 2024-25 applicants, and ultimately, potentially, the 2 different portfolios. So we kind of want to give you the tools to start thinking about the same ideas over and over again. And we hope these will prepare you and us to you all to prioritize these characteristics when we meet again in January.
Okay, so I'm going to go over the process that we're going to use to do this exercise. So as Meg shared, we're going to go through 4 sets of data visualizations, and each set has 2 to 3 graphics. Amarachi and Lolita, you should have the supplementary handout in the email that I sent out yesterday, and so you can go ahead and pull that up as well. For folks who are in the room, these materials are all also included in the handout that you have in person. And so for each set of data visualizations, Meg is going to present key information, so that's the presentation part 1. And then we're going to break you up into pair groups, and you're going to talk about these 3 questions for each image. So what do you learn looking at that graphic? What doesn't the graphic tell you? And what confusions do you have about the graphics? Depending on the data set, you're going to have anywhere from 3, more likely 5 to 9 minutes for that pair discussion. And I'm going to do time calls throughout. And then I'm going to call you back, and then Meg is going to do part 3, which is facilitate a full group discussion about those data visualizations. So we're going to go through all 3 of those steps 4 times over 4 different sets of data visualizations. And for each pair discussion, you're going to rotate. So that way you work with different people throughout the exercise. Okay, so to the fun part. So I'm going to split everyone into pairs right now. And I'm going to count folks off into Group A and Group B. Folks who are in Group A are going to stay seated the whole time. And folks who are in Group B are going to move 1 seat over clockwise for each data set. And for virtual council members, we're going to put you into Group A, and then we're going to break you out into laptops here in person, and so that way some of the in-person people can work with the virtual people. So bear with us. It might be a little logistically bumpy initially, and then we're going to get the hang of it. And then also Lisa is going to be participating as well because we have an odd number of people. So, okay, any questions about the process before we go ahead and start digging into the activity itself? No? Okay. So Group A, so Amarachi and Lolita are Group A, and then there are 12 of you, so 6. So 6, okay. Jamie. Can you start off, so it'll be Jamie and Stephen, if you can start with Group B, and then Alejandra, Group A, and then B. A, B, A, B, A, and then your B. Sorry, yeah, your B, okay. So just remember your letter. Okay, John, don't do breakouts right now. Okay, so if folks can go ahead, and so the folks who are with B, you will actually be just at
to turn off the questions that are. Oops. Oops. Sorry.
That is particularly troublesome. Oh, camera behind me.
All right. Is everyone back? Are our virtual participants out of the breakout rooms? Okay, great. So let's hear from one pair. What did you learn looking at these graphics? Can one pair answer that question? Go for it, Jacob. Don't forget to use your microphone.
Sorry. So
But you can talk about them one by one if you'd like, or as a group, it's up to you.
I think one thing that we both kind of talked about was that that each graph kind of shows that there is a large need for these services. The first graph specifically, there's a lot of need for these services. When it comes to the application program areas requested, that again, it shows that, especially when it comes to after-school programs, you know, there's a lot of organizations out there that are needing these funds. And then the last one, I think the wording was a little difficult, but for the most part, it kind of shows the different types of organizations that are applying for grants and whether they're returning or if they're new. So that was pretty straightforward. Just the wording was a little weird for us.
Did you say the wording was a little weird? The new organizations are new to PCL? Yeah.
Yeah, and then also the word grantee.
Ah, okay.
That's a weird,
Okay, yeah.
considering.
Yeah, I was thinking awardee.
Okay. Yep, that works too. Either way, organizations that already had levy money and either wanted us to renew or continue or fund a different program at their agency, and organizations that did not have PCL money and wanted some. Those are the distinctions. But it sounds like you got it, even though the wording kind of was awkward. Yep, okay. That's helpful feedback. Go ahead, Craig.
And the very first graphic where it has,
I got you.
thank you. The dollars, program areas, it was confusing where the amounts came from. Like the light blue, like hunger relief. How did you divide up the money?
Okay.
So I can see that, you know, the dark blue is what people need to do it, but how come early childhood had 7 million and hunger only had 2.5 or whatever?
Yes.
So.
The amounts in the blue were initially decided by the allocation committee in advance of that funding round. So, and similarly, this time around, an amount of money, but as a range. So the levy will fund approximately X to Y, or this much to that much, in this program area, was put out for each application in our 6 program areas, because there is only 23 million, for example, and it has to be divided up somehow, and we have to be able to applicants have to be able to understand roughly how much is available in that program area. That decision was made by the allocation committee this time and last time. Last time we did it as a absolute sort of number, but ultimately ended up as staff recommending some slight shifts based on the applications that came in. This time, we recommended that they consider it already as a range, because the kinds of applications that come in, how they score, how many there are, how much they're asking for, all have to do with kind of what you may or may not want to recommend, as you all will begin to see. So that was a great question. I want to turn to another pair to share anything that these graphics didn't tell you.
It was kind of difficult for the.
Yeah.
Oh,
Sorry, go ahead. Apologies that we interrupted you. Lolita, was that you? I'm sorry. Please continue.
no, I'm sorry. The application program areas dollars requested. Now, this graph was kind of difficult for me to understand what was happening. What was happening here? I'm just trying to figure out if it was just trying to show, basically that there were three areas that all were kind of like right size, and you had a greater need for allocation versus the smaller foster care, mentoring, and hunger relief, so to speak. I was just trying to think, like, what would a person, um, what is the goal for a person to learn from this particular graph, or the objective here, just to show like this is the money that they requested. So to just show your higher programs, I'm just trying to get this straight, just to show that after school child abuse prevention and early childhood all kind of they were the largest allocation requests there. Or no?
That is one conclusion. I think the first pair, you had a good insight as to what you felt like this graph was telling you. Do you want to restate it again?
Oh no, well, we were talking about the pie graph. For this one, we thought it was actually kind of misleading, just because of the shapes and sizes. So like a good example.
Oh, you're talking about the second graph. I think, Lolita, I'm sorry, were you asking about the second graph we looked at?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, my apologies. I was looking at the first one.
No
Got
worries.
it. Go ahead. Okay.
So yeah, we felt it was a little bit misleading as well, because early childhood, that big bar is 8 million, but after school and child abuse, which is right next to it, together is about 13 million. So if we're looking at, and then compare it also to the 3 million hunger relief had with the 6 million that foster and mentoring both had, it looks misleading when it comes to, if we're trying to look at this and say this is the proportions that everybody had, it's a little misleading for anybody to see. If they just walked in and said, for a person out in the hallway, here, look at this and tell me what you see, it doesn't really compute in our head.
I hear two groups identifying confusion with this graph. I appreciate that. The idea is that the shapes are proportional to how much they asked for out of the total, right? So hunger relief, for example, has the smallest shape. There was the least amount of money requested in that area out of the total compared to, for example, early childhood, which is the largest shape. But your point is well taken that there are similarities. There are not great differences and variances in some of these amounts, and so the shapes are a little bit confusing. Lolita, did that explanation help about sort of like the size of the shape in relationship to the whole?
Yes, that's how I understood it. I was just wondering if I should have been understanding more from it. That's how I understood it, but yes.
Can I just share what I gained from this? Not necessarily saying it was like extremely helpful compared to the last one, but I think as you were explaining it earlier, what I am able to see differently in this one is the number of applicants. And so what I gain is comparing, the proportion of requested dollars compared to the applicants per area. And so you pointed out specifically child abuse prevention and intervention has 19 applicants versus early childhood has 21, and yet they have like a $2.5 million difference. And so that tells me that the request per application is different. So that's helpful to an extent, but I think the other graphs are more helpful to what others have said. And not that you're asking for feedback on the graph itself, but it would be interesting if, say, for the early childhood one, like if you broke that up into 21 blocks somehow, and then, each of them were broken up into their respective blocks, I could then see the average request per early childhood versus hunger relief and probably tell. I mean, I can do the math, I guess, but if it's a visual, that will help me understand like the average request per early childhood versus another area.
Thanks, that's helpful. Okay. I would love to hear one group reflect on something that this didn't tell you. And I know Deanne earlier had something to say, and then Jamie, did you have something to say? Okay.
Okay, so I guess maybe it's just me confused. I don't know if it's both of us, but so I'm still wondering how are funding areas prioritized, right? So, that's when I'm looking at these graphs together. Obviously, there's like, and also the total available, does that mean total funded? Is that it's synonymous?
More or less, yes. We're not looking at what we actually did.
Okay.
We did make some, those lines would be slightly different, but barely, because the amounts of money that was available was really all we had. But in some cases, we shifted a little bit from one program area to another, depending on scores, needs, funding priorities,
So
focus populations. You'll get into that shortly.
Okay. So are different areas assessed differently in terms of like how they're prioritized in terms of how they're, like how many kids they serve, for example, or how many families they serve? Are they weighted differently in different areas when analyzing, or is every area analyzed differently in terms of whether it's going to be funded or not? Or is the same criteria used in each area?
Same criteria are used in each area.
Okay.
The light blue bars in that first graph, so they represent a pie if you think about it. If you add up all those light blue bars, they were the total amount that we had to give that year, right? In advance of putting out the application to the community to submit for grants and requests, the allocation committee decided how big those bars would be, so to speak, in each program area. They prioritized early childhood because investments early on are typically, the greatest chance of helping kids with positive outcomes. The next highest bar, I believe, is after school, correct? Because that's typically, that has historically been the program area in which we have the highest number of applications. Okay. Child abuse and foster care then came next because they are high need priority areas, and foster care as a population, while high need, is also a smaller number of children, compared to our population as a whole in our community. And then mentoring historically has had the least or the fewest applications. That may be changing now. And then hunger relief, also a smaller number of applications. So in part, how those blue bars were set in advance by the allocation committee had to do with sort of historical trends and research-based and policy priorities. Does that help answer that question?
That does help, yes,
Okay.
thank you.
Kamala.
This question might be beyond the scope, but I'm just curious what the levy does when they see such large gaps between like what was requested and what was made available, and just curious about what conversations that happen after.
I'm going to ask everyone to hold on to that question, because as we go forward in these slides, I think you'll begin to see other information that may inform how you would answer that question and how we will answer that question going forward. The gap is one thing, but what's in that gap is a really important piece. Like, were those mostly lower scoring applications? Were they really expensive programs? So there's things you all need to kind of keep in mind as we keep going, and that's a really good question. And if people are comfortable with it, I'd love to go to the next set of graphs. Okay. Yes, was there a question up? Yeah.
I know you were asking about the second question, what these graphics don't tell us. And so if I could maybe point to the last one, I was sitting on this for a second. Obviously, these graphs and data don't tell us about who is awarded, right? Because we're just focused on who applied. But this also makes me wonder, like, about the organizations who didn't even apply, which is perhaps not relevant for our review process because they would have had to apply for us to even consider them. But what are the percentage of organizations who considered applying but didn't for some reason? Or what are the percentage of organizations out there that would be eligible but don't know about PCL? And so that, I think, speaks more to like recruitment and access to the levy application itself. But that's something that this doesn't tell me that makes me wonder about. Yeah. So
Thank you for offering that.
I have a question. I think
to Stephen's point too, and what we talked about, the bar graphs of looking at the difference of breadth and depth and the value within. And so I just wanted to put the question up maybe for further discussion of like, is there a priority on serving new or returning programs? How does that influence the applications? Like, so maybe for further along, I just wanted to put it up to table.
That's a great question. Those are the kinds of questions that the sort of, this is meant to start to spark, especially as you come back in January. How do you use these characteristics to think about what priorities you want to give us to use as we create two different portfolios of anonymous grant applications? Yeah. We're with you. All right. Let's see. Did I share my screen?
Yes, it is shared.
Okay. Great. Okay, 3 more graphs. These get a little bit more complex, and I'm going to walk you through them, and then you'll answer the same set of questions, and you'll change partners. So this graph shows the total number of applications received in 2019 and the total that proposed to serve one or more of these focus populations from that funding round. For example, in 2019, 104 of the 116 applications that the levy received proposed to serve Black, Indigenous, and children of color as a focus population. We're going to look at that more closely in the next few slides. As you look at this slide, please keep in mind that some applications proposed to serve multiple focus populations. For example, an application may have proposed to serve children who identify as African immigrants and refugees, and also to serve children who identify as Asian immigrants and refugees. And that applicant may have also indicated that their service population is generally lower income. That one application would have been counted 3 times here because they indicated that they had a focus population that was Black, Indigenous, and people of color. They indicated they had a focus population that was low income, and they indicated that they had a focus population that was immigrant and refugee. Keeping in mind that one of the levy's goals is to eliminate racial and ethnic disparities in children's outcomes, you will note that the previous slide, most applications proposed to serve Black, Indigenous, and children of color. So we were curious to see if there were any differences between applications from the 2 different types of organizations that applied. Organizations that had levy funds when they applied. So we are calling those grantee organizations. There were 91 applications from organizations that already had a levy grant and either wanted us to continue funding it or they wanted us to fund a different program at their agency. And the bottom bar tells you there were 25 applications from organizations that were new to levy funding or didn't have levy funding at the time that they applied. This graph also looks more closely at the number of applications that were focused on Black, Indigenous, and children of color as a general group or specific populations. The dark blue section shows the number of applications that proposed to serve one or more specific racial and ethnic populations, such as Latino, Latine, Latinx, children, and youth. The light blue bar is the number of applications that propose to serve Black, Indigenous, and children of color generally. For example, after-school programs or hunger relief programs that may be located in a school or a community that is multicultural, and so they didn't necessarily call out specific populations that they were serving. And the gray bar is the number of applications that did not indicate a specific racial and ethnic population that they would serve or that they were serving Black, Indigenous, or children of color generally. In this graph, each application is counted only once. For example, the dark blue bars tell us that there were 42 applications from organizations that had levy funds and proposed to and wanted us to continue funding them or fund a new program that proposed to serve one or more racial and ethnic focus populations, and that there were 10 applications from organizations that were not currently funded by the levy and wanted and proposed to serve specific racial and ethnic focus populations. Please keep in mind with this slide and the next slide that legally all programs funded by the levy are open to anyone. So these are focus populations, but these programs are all open to anyone. the next slide is diving deeper into that blue bar from the dark blue, the dark blue bar from the previous slide. So this graph looks more closely at the number of applications that proposed to serve one or more specific and racial ethnic populations. This slide examines details behind that dark blue bar from the previous slide. And it looks at the two different groups, again, of applications by type of organization, whether the organization was a current grantee asking us to continue funding a current program or funded a different program, or the applicant was an organization that was new to levy funds. In the dark blue bars on the previous slide, we counted applications one time, regardless of who they said they were going to serve. In this slide, we count applications for each racial and ethnic population they proposed to serve. The bars show the number of applications that proposed to serve specific racial and ethnic focus populations. Some applications proposed to serve only one. Some applications proposed to serve more than one. An application was counted for each population they proposed to serve. This graph does not include the applications that propose to serve Black, Indigenous, and children of color generally. This graph only counts the applications that called out specific racial and ethnic focus populations. For example, there were 10 applications from grantee organizations that proposed to serve children who identify as African. They may have proposed to serve other populations as well, and they would have been counted in the other bars. But there were at least 10 that proposed to serve children who identify as African. And there were 2 applications from organizations that were new to the levy that proposed to serve that same population. Keep in mind that legally all programs are open to anyone.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and switch pairs. So remember what group you were in. If you were in group B, if you could pick up your belongings and move 1 seat left. And group A, stay seated.
Can you get open to put Amachi and Lolita back up? And our folks are back from the breakout room. I think Open Signal is going to bring them back to the screen for us. Okay. Is there a pair who wants to go first with offering something that you learned by looking at the graphics? All right, Jacob. And then after that, other people in this group, chime in.
Thank you all. Me and Alex were tearing this apart right off the get-go. And we want to start on actually the third graph because we think when we are trying to be specific about what a organization's primary goals and objectives are, we think it's very important that if it's more than one or two or more than two or three different races, it's a BIPOC like focus. And I think that is kind of important because the information that is collected in this is if it's a primary focus is one like ethnic group. We don't want to deter people to say that. And I think that's valuable information. And then when we talk about people who are just serve everybody, to just count every single thing, it just feels kind of just a waste of a vote in a sense, because we're really trying to focus on what ethnic group are we affecting specifically. And I think it also, and I don't know if there's a protection of like saying, hey, we're focusing on a specific ethnic group itself when we're talking about voting and stuff or deciding which grantee. But I think it also, that the aspect of just everybody gets a vote kind of situation, or like here's the people that you have, and not having a primary and a secondary, I think that can affect a lot of the information and also skew like who we're really helping and who are the ethnic groups that we're trying to serve.
I think the other piece of information that, and I know this is not the question that we're on, but the other piece of information that's a little bit missing for me in all of this is, while there may be a focus on serving BIPOC children, that does not necessarily correlate to organizations and programs being culturally specific, which is very different. And so if the priority, if there is a priority on supporting culturally specific services, so services that are focused on children from a specific race or ethnicity, led and administered by people who are part of that community, I don't know that from this, which to me it's hard to kind of compare apples to apples, a culturally specific organization or like a large mainstream organization that may have programs that focus on BIPOC folks are gonna approach those services really differently. So I think it's great that like the majority of our applicants are focusing on BIPOC and low income folks, but there's I think a need for specificity in that information to help folks make decisions.
Thank you for both of you for sharing. Alex, I hear your feedback. Jacob, I want to revisit a question. You mentioned the word vote a few times, and I think I want to understand a little bit more what you were referring to as you were describing what you were taking away from these graphs.
Yeah, I think, I guess probably vote's not the right word. When we make decisions on who we are awarding and stuff with this, I think that's what I mean by the vote. I don't want people, when we say, hey, like, is your organization focusing on African refugees, for instance? Like, I don't want people thinking that, like, oh, well, this is another African program, and that's gonna give that fear of like, oh, if they ask that question, that they're going to be marked less then. So I think for me, having a primary and secondary is kind of like a way to say, hey, we want to celebrate your primary focus, and then also who else are you serving as well, and not to say, oh, well, if this is your primary, you only have to pick one person that you can serve. That's what it is. And I'm just trying to make it a little bit more in celebrating that, that people are specifically focusing on a culturally specific group, and also celebrating that people have secondary focuses as well.
Okay. Thank you.
I'm kind of wondering, based on hearing this conversation, if it would be helpful for staff to share an example of kind of how these breakout segments, like how we came up with BIPOC only versus culturally specific, and to give kind of de-identified examples where possible of like what that looks like in practice in the applications.
Sure. I think also when we get to the next data set and we talk about the structure of the application and how the scoring criteria that you all helped shape were about equity, I think we'll start to remind you all about some of these things too. To answer your question, Katrina, so I don't know that if you all will remember, but for this current application that we're in, and similarly with our previous application, applicants are naming, their focus populations, and in this case, they are being asked, and then last time, many questions about what makes them qualified to serve that population. And you all structured points around how well they speak to those issues. And so we didn't necessarily call it cultural specificity because there were so many issues that we wanted to get at, whether they were serving a single population or perchance 2 or 3 focus populations. There are organizations in our community currently that receive Levy grants that serve more than one racial and ethnic population, and they do so with staff as well as they can to mirror that particular population. They are led by people from those communities. And those are the types of questions that you all wanted to ensure were in this application again this time. And there are points associated with those criteria. And in theory, and we'll go through this in the next part of the next set of slides, higher scoring applications, those scores are correlated with criteria around their responsiveness to the specific populations they're trying to serve. Did I help answer the question, Katrina, that you raised about sort of being a bit more transparent about how we got to these? Okay, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, no, I think I 100% remember those conversations. I think if we're talking about data collection, which I think this is like for these graphs, I think the data collection part, it would be valuable. That's all I'm saying. Because if we collected that data and we just kept that data aside from the information and award of the awardees when we're making those decisions, then we can go back to the people that we do award and be able to use that, primary and secondary information to get a more clearer idea of like, these are the people that we awarded and this is their background and their primary and secondary. And I think that's what we're hoping to see come out of this outcome wise. But no, I 100% I get what you're saying. Yes, sorry.
I want to open up space for other questions, confusions in these graphs. Yeah, Kamala.
One thing that we discussed was there's 25 new to PCL organizations, and just how to interpret that. Is that like a cause for celebration, or did that meet a goal, or how should we sit with that?
Keep in mind, these are all applicants. Nothing here tells you whether we funded this organization or not. So new to PCL funding means at the time that they submitted the application, they didn't have a Levy grant, and they were sort of new to our experience with them, if that makes sense. So out of that 25, nothing in this presentation tells you how many of them ended up with a Levy grant after 2019. And I think if your question is sort of like, is 25 generally as applicant seekers a good number? I think that gets to Stephen's point from earlier about sort of like, he was sort of wondering aloud about like, what about the organizations that didn't submit, or kind of what out of the total qualified, how do we make sense of this 25? We don't have a way to really anchor that. I don't know if 25 is the right number or 50. We can certainly compare this year, the 2024-25 applicant pool. We can at least compare the new organization, so to speak, in that pool and see how it compares to the 25. So this is sort of a baseline for us, but I don't think we have a great sense for what the total universe was to sort of say, is 25 a big portion of that? Is it a small portion? Did that answer your question?
I guess partly there's a question around like how, I know that the committee spent a lot of time trying to think with staff about how to reduce barriers. And so just curious if there are goals around wanting to see new applicants.
I would say that our team did a lot of research to figure out how to reach out to organizations that didn't have Levy grants, that were new to us, just in terms of like who's doing work in our program areas. We tried to be intentional about organizations that had revenue sizes that were eligible for these large grants. When we found that organizations that were smaller, we tried to sort of keep track of them for our next small grants process. So I think that the question, though, about how many ultimately come forward compared to this 25 will be some good measure of kind of how much more our outreach got to it. Erica, do you want to chime in? You did a lot of intentional work on that.
I would just say, I think that whatever the number ends up being, once we see who actually went forward with their applications, because some people may have like logged in and said, oh, I don't qualify or whatever, and not finished their application, only gives us part of the picture, because it tells us how many new to us people we reached and who felt that they qualified to meet the requirements for large grants. Some of them may have gone in and said, oh, I'm going to need to apply for a small grant. And just as a reminder, like part of that threshold is has to do with PCL's funding can't be more than 30% of your total revenue. And also after a certain threshold, under a certain threshold, smaller organizations have some additional capacity building and capacity building opportunities kind of in small grants that allow them to grow, to be successful, and if they are awarded a large grant in the future. So there's some benefits to being in small grants. But it doesn't allow you as much funding. So some people may have gone in there and said, okay, well, we don't meet the qualifications for large grants, which means they're sitting this out until the next round, which is later next year. So it doesn't give us the complete picture of how many new organizations we reached if some of those ended up being smaller organizations that couldn't apply for large.
And the other thing I'll add to that is that after the community council works on large grants funding round, we're going to work on small grants funding round. So that will be the next bucket of work for y'all.
I want to just open up to see if there's one last burning issue on this last 3 slides that you all looked at before we go to the next set, which you've already kind of started chipping away at. Okay.
I was going to ask from someone who we haven't heard from yet.
Karina, we haven't heard from you yet, so chime in.
I just had a question about the focus populations. You stated that it's only listed as, I can't read my own handwriting, specifically identified populations. I'm just curious, is this based off of language used in the application, or is this language used when they're like checking the box, right? Because like, is our applications being coded for other language use, right? So like, let's say they fill it out and they mark Asian or mark Pacific Islander, but then inside of the application, maybe they might specify we focus on Vietnamese population. Is that also going to be considered, or is it considered in something like this?
In this graph that you're looking at, no, this was oversimplified for the purpose of this exercise. That information is often in applications. One thing that you all will need to consider, however, is that it could become quickly obvious what applications are in a portfolio. If our intention is to make 2 different portfolios that are essentially anonymous, and if we start getting into deeper details around a specific community that is called out in an application, it may become quickly known to you all which applicant it could be. So we're going to try to balance between how well to give information that helps describe the applicant's reach in our community without revealing applicants. So, and that is a difficult balance, but your point is a good one. We do have language data that will come in through applications this time, so we may be able to look at that more as well. But until we have all the applications in and we see what that data look like, I don't know yet. Okay.
We can move on.
Okay. So as I mentioned a little bit ago in response to Alex's question and observation about those last 3 slides, I just want to remind you all that as we consider applicant characteristics, a big thing to consider is the score that the community reviewers give on an application. The structure of the application this time around has 3 major sections. There are questions about the organization that is applying. There are 44 out of the 52 points that focus on the applicant organization have to do with racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. In the program section, there are 64 out of the 80 points focused on racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. And the budget section is a little bit more straightforward about numbers and how you came to this budget, which is 20 points. Please keep in mind that you all, with staff support too, spent a lot of time helping design those questions and those scoring criteria. So that distribution is the result of your good work and advice. So about 70% of the points on these applications and the scoring criteria are designated toward racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. This suggests that applications that score high are demonstrating strength in these areas. In the 2019 grant round, the application asked slightly different questions and had slightly different scoring criteria, but still scores about half of the points were focused on racial equity, diversity, and inclusion, and scores highly correlated with the applicant's focus and strengths in equity, diversity, and inclusion. So as you keep that in mind about scores, we'll look at this graph. So this is a scatter plot. Each dot represents a single application from 2019. The graph shows the application score on the left-hand side. That's what that axis is. No application scored lower than 50, so that's why there's a 50 at the bottom there, and the highest score on an application was 98. The bottom axis across the bottom there shows the total annual dollars that the application requested. So the minimum amount that an applicant could request was $100,000, and the maximum was $675,000. The different colors represent different program areas. The 2 dark lines on the graph help with 2 important thresholds. The dark vertical line marks the average annual grant request. That was $337,000. It splits the graph in half, showing the number of applications that wanted more than $137,000 or less than that amount. The dark horizontal line shows the average score across applications, which was 85 points out of 100. The dark horizontal line splits the graph, showing the number of applications that scored under 85 or over 85. So the dark lines together divide this graph into 4 quadrants: higher scoring, lower cost applications in the upper left, higher scoring, higher cost applications in the upper right, lower scoring, lower cost applications in the bottom left, and lower scoring, higher cost applications in the bottom right.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and break out into pairs again. So if you are in group B, go ahead and stand up, and you're going to move one seat to the left.
All right. Let's hear from one group about something you learned from these slides. Go ahead, Karina. Oh, I'm gonna look.
Something that I think kind of stood out. Oh my God. I'm so sorry. Okay. Something that kind of stood out for me that Stephen and I were talking about was just the distribution of these beautiful dots. When I look at it, my thought process is, are the ones on the top right scoring high and asking for more money because they are potentially new programs where they've kind of done some research behind equity or like what they want to do in 3 years versus 5 years versus, however many years. And then they sit down and they're like, oh, we need this much, so we're going to apply for this much and see kind of how that goes, versus on the top left, potentially organizations that are established, that are scoring high, that have seen success, that have that kind of continuous standing of funding, so maybe are applying for, I don't know. This is just my assumption. You're making a face and I'm scared.
Yeah. No, you should take nothing from my face at all. Sorry. I was just, no, you're good. I'm listening. It's my thinking face.
Okay. It's like, oh my God, I'm reading this wrong. But then Erica mentioned it could also be, multiple programs or what's it called? Applications within kind of that organization, potentially.
I was just pointing out that each dot is an application,
Oh.
not an organization.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
an organization could have two or three or four
Different dots.
applications that represent different dots on this.
Gotcha. Okay. Yeah.
The other thing is that these dots, they don't say whether or not you aren't able to distinguish from this image if an organization is new to PCL funding or not.
No, I know. That's why I said I started off with, this is my assumption of these applicants, is that we don't know, but based on it, in my understanding of just like watching people in my life start new programs or start new proposals, oftentimes when they're applying for things, they're going through the motions of the timeline and then being like, oh, I think we need this much to start up. And so they will usually, I don't know, this is just from experience with people in the past. They're like, we'll apply for more, and then once we get it going, then we can apply for less later. So I'm just making that assumption.
Thanks, Karina. That's helpful. Amarachi has a hand up.
So maybe this kind of graph is a little hard. It's one of those things that I have to take a moment to sit with, because there's just so much different kinds of data on one graph. And maybe I could be mistaken, but it appears, I noticed one trend was that the ones that organizations that, well, just like an application that applied for less than, applied for a lower amount, so maybe 100,000, 200,000, tended to receive lower scores. And also I had a question of, this is just needing a reminder myself, what is the minimum and maximum amount an application can request for? Or someone could, that's all I have.
Yes, from the 2019 process, or are you asking for the
2019 process?
The minimum in 2019 that they could request was 100,000, and the maximum was 675,000.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. Dean, go ahead.
Yes. So I know. So I was looking at the colors and seeing a disproportionate amount, for example, of child abuse prevention intervention programs. The lower they requested, it seemed to be the lower they tended to score, which to me actually tracks when you consider how expensive that program, in order to prevent child abuse, likely is. And in addition to that, we also noticed that there were a lot of that the larger the organization was, and the more, or in terms of the more they requested, the better they tended to perform. And that raises interesting questions about the scale of these organizations. Like she said, she tended to believe that they were small organizations requesting more to start off. But I actually go on the opposite. I tend to believe that larger organizations tend to have larger bureaucracies, and thus they tend to request large funds with a promise of better payoff than smaller organizations. And I wish we had some more data there on that, because that would be a very interesting thing to look at. In addition to that, we tend to find that organizations, when you look at this, a lot of mentoring organizations have a disproportionate amount of failure or to reach the 85% standard, and which is interesting when you consider the fact that like over half of these applicants fail to reach 85% or more of this standard. That's something that I think raises a very interesting question of why. And as someone was talking about regarding smaller organizations and the potential correlation with the lower scores, that is something that we might have to ask, is this a capacity issue? So that's something that I think we have to really be mindful of. And that's all the stuff that I can think of at the moment, but I'll let my partner here, Kathy, add any thoughts that she has.
Thanks, Dean. I think in order to get you through the last set, and it's the easiest one, we save the easiest one for last. Let's go forward. This has been a lot, and you're doing a great job hanging with it. Okay. Sorry, there's just two more, and they're kind of the same thing twice, but it's important to know the difference. So this graph looks at the number of applications by program area that propose to address each funding priority in that program area. So the program areas each have their own different colored bars. The size of the bar is proportional to the number of applications in that program area that proposed to address the funding priorities. The funding priorities on this slide and the next slide are shorthand wording for 2024-25's actual funding priorities. This is fake data. Yeah. We just wanted to give you a sense of what we can bring you in a couple months. But the funding priorities are real. They are what you all helped develop as a result of our community engagement process. The words are shorthand for them, but those are our real funding priorities for 24-25 in these program areas and the next three program areas on the next slide that you all helped develop. It's just that the numbers of applications on here are fake for now. So there's that one, and then the next one. Sort of same idea, three more of our program areas, the funding priorities in those funding areas. In those the program areas with the funding priorities and the number of applications. Thanks. The number of applications that is proposing to address those funding priorities. One little thing to keep in mind as you read these, which is noted here on this slide, we will experience this when applications come in. A single application can propose to address more than one funding priority in the program area. So an application could say, I'm doing all of them, or I'm doing one of them, or I'm doing three of them. So the way that this slide is designed is each funding priority that is called out is counted. Is that? They're not ranked, are they? No, they're not ranked. This is essentially telling you that in a single program area, let's look at child abuse. 14 applications are proposing to address the bottom, the funding priority that's on the bottom there. Thank you. No, there's no ranking. There's no ranking.
Early childhood is the top one, is not.
Nope, there is no relationship between how these program areas are on these slides at all and any kind of policy. Right, this is just, there was this funding priority. Exactly, yeah. It's just for ease of data reading. Okay.
Okay, so this is the final set of pair discussion and final full group discussion. So group B, stand up and rotate to your left. Group B, one seat to your left. We are in sight of the break. It is coming up very shortly.
Is that for you or for me?
And you have We are almost to the break, I promise you.
Are we all back? Oh, good. Here we go. Yeah. And we've got, okay, great. And our virtual members are here. So I'm going to just go right to the question about any confusions about these graphs. All right. for our audio, for our virtual folks who probably couldn't hear Jacob because he didn't have his mic on, he said, he had no questions. This is the one set of graphs he's okay with. So Amarachi's laughing. Anybody? Stephen, go ahead.
So I don't find it confusing. I think it's pretty straightforward. But one thing it does leave me wondering is within each category, and this applies to the other graphs that show any one application counted multiple times. I think it would also be helpful to show the total number of applications in each group. So for like early childhood, is that 16 total applications or is it 30 total applications? And what that would help me understand is more so like how many applicants only chose one of those areas versus how many chose all four. And this kind of goes to earlier conversations on, are they just choosing everything? And like, I mean, not that that will maybe make a difference because we're looking at like the set of applications for us, but I'd be curious.
That's helpful. Thank you. Any other reflections on this set of slides? Yes.
I have a question. This doesn't also tell us, but not that everyone has to answer every question, but this doesn't give us the ethnicity at all, right? So it doesn't get to that. So we don't know the demographics here. This just tells us the priority.
Correct. It does not.
Areas.
Right. It does not tell you.
So
which
when
one
I'm thinking about like new organizations applying for grants, and this was kind of a question from last time, it seems like the newer organizations were less likely to call out specific focus areas, right? Like they would say BIPOC, but not necessarily. So does that would that mean that they would score less high on equity and therefore be less likely to be funded? So, and that's not from this, but I'm just wondering now what I do with that information if it's laid out like this. So,
Yes, I hear you. The slides that we looked at last do not have any relationship to what population is being served. That's true. There's no way that we gave you that information there. You also brought up from the second set that we looked at, yes, it was a reasonable conclusion to draw that the organizations that were new to PCL funding and submitted applications in which they weren't necessarily calling out a specific population probably means that they didn't answer other questions that had to do with racial equity and cultural responsiveness of a population the way that organizations who were serving those populations would have. So yes, they probably did score lower if they didn't have a specific equity focus and then talk about how that equity focus was driving everything they were trying to do in their program. Yeah.
so therefore, would newer organizations be less likely to get funded because of that? That would be a question I would have as we move forward.
That's a great question. Anything else? We are at the end of this data exercise, and I just want to make sure on this last set, you will have another opportunity to think about all of this stuff together in just a minute, but I just want to scan for any further final thoughts. You all have done a great job sticking with this.
Okay, so we are going to take a 10-minute break. It is 3:17 right now, so you can come back by 3:27. During this break, if you can take out your laptops and connect to the guest Wi-Fi, the instructions, the network is right here with the password, and pull up the Zoom whiteboard and pull EV links that I sent you in the email last night. And if you have any trouble with this, you can reach out to Brian right there. So 10-minute break. Be back at 3:27.
Sorry about that.
Thanks, Brian. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and transition now. And we're going to do a little bit of solo reflection and give you some time to integrate the exercise we just went through. So each of those data visualizations that we were working through is made up of 1 to 3 applicant characteristics. And then in the handout that we gave to you on page 18, there's also a list of the applicant characteristics that we're planning to produce for January's meeting, which includes both characteristics you've already seen, as well as additional characteristics that aren't visualized. As a reminder, we're going to be updating all of those visuals with the recent 2024 information that we are getting in right now. And then at the next meeting that we're at, we're going to ask you to advise us on what characteristics staff should use to craft 2 portfolios. So we're going to be getting your input on how we should be interpreting and translating those characteristics into recommendations and portfolios. So from those, from January's meeting, staff is then going to take your recommendations, craft the 2 portfolios. We're going to send you those portfolios in advance of February's meeting, and then in February's meeting, we're going to ask you to recommend one of those portfolios for funding. So based on this exercise that we've just been through, we want you to take a couple of minutes to review those characteristics and then just do some reflection on these following questions. Why are the data useful to us? Is there additional support that you need for January's meeting, January's conversation? What questions do you have? And what other reflections do you have? So with the laptop that you already have open, I'm going to ask you to go ahead and go to the Zoom whiteboard, and I'm going to try and demo as well here, so just bear with me for a moment. Okay. So we have the Zoom whiteboard up here. And so you can write your questions, your answers to each of these questions in the boards in front of you. And so to use this tool on your keyboard, you can press N to create a new sticky note. You can press the hand button in the bottom right in order to grab the screen and move it around a little bit. You can zoom using the glasses on the bottom right. My pad isn't moving right now. You can press the arrow in the left bar in order to be able to select your sticky note and then edit it or move it around. Please don't use any of the other features of the Zoom whiteboard, otherwise things are going to get real creative, which is fine, but we want to be able to read what you're writing. And then try not to edit in anyone else's sticky note. And to be able to do that, in order to identify who you are, you can click on this top right. If you look at the top right, you can kind of click there and you can see which you should be listed. So I'm listed as guest 4. As the editor, that's me, so that's how I can tell what my name is. And yeah, be patient. Sometimes it takes a moment for the Zoom feature to load. So you'll have about 8 minutes to just do a little bit of reflection on these questions. And you can also have a moment just to read what other people are writing too. go ahead and you can have about 2 more minutes to finish up this portion of the exercise. 2 more minutes. Okay, so we're going to go ahead and start to transition to our remaining big agenda item. Okay, so we are going to do a really big pivot. We're going to go to bylaws, the community council bylaws. For a little bit of context, staff wanted to propose an amendment to the attendance requirements outlined in the community council bylaws, with the goal of aligning our policies with disability inclusion values and also to increase clarity around attendance requirements. Currently, council members are removed from this body if they miss 3 council meetings in 1 calendar year. And we're proposing amendments to exclude absences due to illnesses or emergencies. And so I wanted to give you a couple of minutes to read through the proposal. It's on page 19 of your supplementary handout. You can see the current language in the middle at the top, and then the proposed amendments are in red at the bottom. So I'll just give you a couple minutes to read through that. Does anyone need any more time reading? No? Okay. So for this process, we're just going to use the same consensus building process that we used on the funding priorities to make a decision about these amendments. So we're just going to do a round of clarifying questions, a round of reactions and edits, a round of must-haves, and a consensus check. If we run out of time doing this process, I'm going to transition us to a majority vote decision-making process. But I don't anticipate it taking that long. And then regardless, we're going to vote after the discussion using poll EV to mark the vote. Meg, can you go to the next slide? And so when we get there, a yes vote will be counting towards consensus, an abstain will still count towards consensus. It won't be a block, and then a no would be a block. So go ahead and actually go back, Meg, to the previous slide. Okay, so does anyone have any clarifying questions about the proposed amendments to the attendance bylaws? Deanne?
Yes. Oops, I forgot to turn this on. So, yeah, overall, this looks pretty solid. My only real concern is regarding the term, the term emergency. I'd prefer is like more specific about what types of emergencies count and what do not. Just because, as coming from someone who has studied parliamentary procedure and stuff like that, people were rules lawyer all the time. So I just want to make sure that we have a definitive list of what counts and what does not, just so that we can prevent any sort of person from abusing the process. So that's all.
Okay, so I'm hearing from you, this is going to be more in kind of the reactions and edits piece that you would like to add in more clarification around what counts as an emergency.
Yes, and I also wanted to know if the council itself, people who had proposed these amendments had a specific definition of emergency in mind.
So I was the one who drafted this, and when I thought of emergencies, I was thinking of it being on the word of honor of the council member. If a council member wrote in and said that they had an emergency, then my plan was to take them at their word.
Thank you.
I had a question as if it is an emergency and then maybe an illness, at what point is there just too many at 3? Is there a limit?
There currently isn't one, but I think that would be up for our discussion.
My question is, why does it say members may miss 2 meetings in A1, but then it says misses 3 in the second paragraph?
So in the first paragraph, it's saying how many may be missed, and you can still be a member. In the third paragraph, it's saying if you miss 3 or more, then you will be removed. So essentially, if you miss 3 meetings, you will be removed. If you can miss up to 3, or sorry, up to 2. So, no, it's excluding emergencies, excluding illnesses. Yeah.
And how many meetings per year are we meant to have?
It varies.
Yeah.
So this year we'd planned to have 5, but we went down to 4. I can't remember how many we had last year. There were 5 last year, and then this upcoming year we know for sure we're going to have 2. 2 are already on the books for January and February. We haven't scheduled them yet. We're going to have small grants as well. Yeah. Karina, go ahead.
Can I just language-wise, I'm just so confused. I wonder, can I just make a suggestion? I'm so sorry. Yeah. November 7th, I'm so close. If it could say something like subject to removal, because I feel like 2 meetings before being removed, and then to me it's just really confusing. Or if it were to say members may miss 2 meetings in a calendar year excluding before subject of removal.
Before being the subject of removal?
Well, something of that. It makes the first paragraph, the way I read it, it makes it sound, you miss 2 meetings, you will be removed. But then, I know,
Okay.
but that's how I'm interpreting it. Before being subject to removal.
Maybe allowed to miss?
Members are allowed to miss 2 meetings in a calendar year.
We could call it a 3 strikes policy.
Oh, I need.
Also though, yeah, and
The
and
language of bylaws is very specific. So there is may, which you can, and then there is shall, which you must. So if you are required to attend this number of meetings, but we're not saying that. We're saying that you may miss up to 2 meetings before you are subject to removal from the council. So if you miss 3 meetings, you will be subject to removal from the council. Yeah, that's how I read that. But
That's
so. So just for clarification, are we moving into like discussions like amendments to the amendments, or I'm just not sure.
I think
No, we're not.
I think go ahead, Alejandra.
I think perhaps we add the word subject, but I am concerned about the fact that we have 10 minutes left, and I really think we're overthinking this. Yeah.
That's
My opinion is I think we need to move on.
That's fair. I just want to ensure that like we also that we just have something specific and actionable so that we can institutionalize this. Because while I trust all my colleagues here, we have no idea like what people will try to do like 10, 20 stuff in the future, and I prefer to institutionalize and have things be very very clear, and because when you leave it up to human discretion, that often leads to, of course, human error.
Are there any other folks who want to share any reflections? I'm thinking about actually pivoting us to a majority vote on this. Does anyone have any thoughts that they want to share before we go to a majority vote?
I'm just going back to the question of how many can you miss with excused emergencies and illnesses. So if we have 5 meetings, say I miss 1 and the next time I'm sick and then the third time I have an emergency, can I still miss 1 more in my allowable amount? Like there's how much out of the 5 can we miss even with emergencies and even with illness to be able to be a participating member?
If you were ill for every single meeting this year, which no one has been, but people have been ill twice this year. So if we adopted this new rule and you were ill for every single meeting that happened next year, you could still be on the council. I think at that point, as staff, we would probably have a discussion with you about whether or not it makes sense for you to continue. And from what I have seen of participation of everyone who is on the council currently, everyone who is a member currently really wants to be a member. And when they aren't here, it's generally because they are ill or they are taking care of someone else who is ill. And then the people who have missed meetings that aren't for that reason, they're either because of work or because they're traveling, they haven't missed more than 2.
What's the minimum number of committee members that need to be here at one time?
In order to have a vote, we have to have a quorum, which is 7. Okay, so we are going to go ahead and move to a vote on this. So you can go ahead and go to the link. Hang on just one second. I need to activate the poll. Okay, I've activated the poll, so you can go to the Poll EV link and vote. And we are doing a majority vote on adopting these bylaws.
I'm sorry, Katrina, but where is the link at?
Thank you, Lolita. The link is in the email that I sent you yesterday. It is in the body of the email at the bottom.
At the very bottom. Oh.
Meg, I'm not sure. It's right here, right? But I don't know why it's not.
When you click on that, it doesn't work? Copy and paste that link into a browser window.
Maybe. Just this part, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's in the body of the, where it says council bylaws here.
In the email that I sent you yesterday, Lolita, in the body of the email itself,
Oh,
midway down where there was the Zoom whiteboard link and the evaluation link, there was also a poll EV link. If you could click on the poll EV link. And Jacob just resent the email. Thank you, Jacob. We have 9 votes in. Just waiting on 2 more.
I also dropped it in the chat.
Okay, we'll just give whoever else is voting about 1 more minute to vote. Okay, so we will go ahead and move on. It looks like you have voted to adopt the proposed attendance bylaws. We have 9 votes for it and 1 vote against it. Meg, I'll turn it over to you to close us out.
All right, in our final few minutes here, just to give you a heads up of what's coming, you will hear from Katrina very soon to get your input on scheduling our council meetings for January and February. We as staff will be in the process in a matter of weeks of processing all the applications, supporting and preparing the reviewers to score the applications, and we will be doing all the data analysis to bring you updated visuals that look at the 2024-25 applicant pool and their characteristics, and integrating today's conversation and feedback that you have to the extent that we are able to do that. Before you leave today, please complete the evaluation. It is a hard copy. There's a hard copy in your packet. It's the last page of the packet that Katrina sent you. There is also a link that came in your email. Those of you who want to collect stipends, there's a stipend invoice connected to your packet as well, very, very last page. And please give those to Katrina before you leave, both the evaluation and the invoice. Are there any final questions or anything before we wrap up?
This evaluation is the evaluation same thing?
Yes, yes, online evaluation or hard copy are the same thing. Kamala? Yes, if you need to run out the door right now, you may fill out the evaluation remotely, yes. But please fill it out, it's helpful to us. And
No.
And don't forget the stipend invoice. If you get a stipend, please leave me the stipend invoice form.
And the evaluation asks questions that reflect on the whole year as well as this meeting, so we really hope you will take the time to fill it out. Thanks again, everyone, for your time today. This was a long one and a technical one, so way to bear with us. And thanks again.
This one and this.
Have a great weekend.
Oh, don't do this. I would do the side. Okay.
Because it's for 2 meetings.
I see. Thank you. Okay.
try to